Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Heart-Centered Therapist. I'm so excited that you're here today. Today, I am meeting with a guest that I'm super interested to bring to you. Her name is Kresta Dalrymple. Kresta is a licensed marriage and family therapist in Southern California. She received her master's from Antioch University, Los Angeles, and currently works in a small group practice, Pasadena Trauma Therapy, specializing in complex trauma, adult sexual abuse survivors, and dissociative disorders. Kresta is a certified complex trauma treatment practitioner level 2, certified in Brainspotting, and is trained in internal family systems and TRIP. Kresta has additional experience working with eating disorders, addiction, and a subspecialty in misophonia. She herself has found freedom from misophonia, with which she struggled for 35 years. She views compassion, curiosity, creativity, and spirituality as an important part of her work as a therapist and as a human, going through her own healing journey. And so today, my friend, we are going to discuss a topic that some of us don't know much about, and yet so many people struggle with it. And so it's really important to increase the awareness about this. We're going to talk about misophonia. Kresta is going to share a lot of her experience. And of course, we're going to talk about trauma because we have such an expert with us. Welcome, Kresta. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited too. Granted, this is a very new topic for me, but before we dive into the nuts and bolts of misophonia and trauma work, I'd love to start with this question. What does being a heart-centered therapist mean to you?
I love this question. It really made me reflect on what that meant. And I became aware of parts of me that I hadn't really thought of before that were working together. So from an IFS, internal family systems or parts work perspective, this is very much aligned with that. But when I went to my heart and looked to see what was there, the word that kept coming up was hope. So, and I see that as a through line sort of in my journey in becoming a therapist. But what I also realized when I went to my heart was that it was balanced and supported by my brain and my gut. So, and if you think about just body, right there, we've got our head up top, our heart is in the middle, and then the gut usually is like lower in the stomach. And I realized that while my heart wants to, it just values hope so much, my brain helps me like think of the logic stuff to help that happen. And then my gut instinct informs me of the right path to take. It's like my guide, but so they're all working together. And so that question really made me think about that and as it applies to my journey.
Oh my goodness, I love that so much. And what an amazingly thoughtful response. But then it's like heart-centered, of course, right? That's the central part. And then it's connected to these other parts of us. And I just love how you describe that. I think it's so important, hope, that we offer that to our clients. And it's a beautiful way to start this episode about trauma and, some of the really difficult things people struggle with. Like, to have some hope that there could be healing is key. Even if the healing takes a long time, that hope is so important.
Yes. And and the connection between trauma and I actually hadn't made the connection between trauma and misophonia until recently. But yes, the key, I think, to working with trauma is not only having hope for yourself, but holding it for your clients. If they're really stuck somewhere, holding that space for hope. And that's what my therapist and my supervisor did for me on my journey. And it transformed, I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't had those people in my life holding hope for me. And the thing about misophonia is that a lot of the messages around it are that it is hopeless, which is really depressing. And I have parts that get really upset about that because I think there is hope, and we haven't exhausted things that could help. And then of course I'm living proof of I no longer have misophonia. So now I'm trying to spread that message out. Not that I expect people's healing journey to be exactly like mine, or that I have all the answers about how to quote cure. I hate that word, cure. um, or fix, right? We have to fix it. Misophonia, but just holding the hope that if I can do it, I'm sure someone else can do it. So just figuring that out.
Yes, absolutely. And so I really want us to talk about this healing journey as you described it, the importance of a supervisor and a therapist who held so much hope for you, and we'll be bringing that thread in and pulling on it throughout this episode, I'm sure. We've talked about misophonia. Let's just if you could just share a little bit of a definition, what it is, what it looks like, whatever would be helpful for our listener, because I think personally, I don't know all of the details about it. And I think also there are some myths in, public knowledge about misophonia. So yeah, just tell us a little about it, please.
Yeah, so misophonia was given a name, I believe, around 2006 by an audiologist who started to see this pattern in clients. It's considered currently as a sound sensitivity problem. But basically what happens is common everyday noises trigger a fight or flight response in the body, and that's usually followed by feelings of rage or disgust. And the flight or flight response gets expressed in an urge to even like hurt or punch someone, or run away, or the need to get away from the sound. And it's such common everyday sounds. Chewing noises are the most common, but it can be anything from office noises like pen clicking, footsteps, really any sort of innocuous, usually repetitive sound, breathing sounds. And then there's also, that's usually kind of misophonia classic, as we say. And then there's sort of the apartment variety. So hearing sounds through walls, dogs barking. I know of someone who lived in a big city and the sound of the elevator in their building was a trigger noise for them. Appliance humming, like a refrigerator humming, those can all also be misophonia trigger sounds. And it varies in severity. It can be mildly annoying all the way up to, I've actually known people to report wanting to hurt their ears, like to cause permanent hearing damage so that they don't have to experience the trigger noises. So, and usually what happens is, because it usually gets worse, not better over time, it starts, for a while I always thought it would start around puberty, but there have been cases that it started earlier. And it gets worse over time. So collection of triggers is very common. You start with a few triggers, usually close family members are the first trigger sort of people and the sounds they make. And then that will extend to coworkers or even things you see on TV, here on TV. And then there's also, sorry, now I'm going all over the place. There's so much here. There's so much here to know about misophonia. There's a visual component too called misokinesia. So it's not just hearing trigger sounds, it can also be visual triggers as well. But it does get worse over time. And usually what people end up doing is they end up isolating. They avoid social interactions. It can come between romantic partners, parents and children. It can destroy family dynamics. It can be really destructive. And it's estimated that up to 20% of the population suffers with some level of this.
That's a big
So it's
percentage.
important. Yes. So it's really important to know about.
Mhm.
You can edit this part out.
Oh, don't worry, Sarah, you can edit out a few coughs and poor Kresta is recovering.
So sorry.
Thank you.
I might have to blow my nose. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I hate sinus stuff. as someone with misophonia, this stuff would really trigger me.
Yeah.
The blowing of the nose and slurping of tea.
Right.
These very common trigger noises. Okay, sorry about that.
Okay, should we start again? All right, so let's see. Um, So, Kresta, that's such a comprehensive explanation of misophonia, and so much that I didn't realize, especially around the repetitiveness of the sounds. It's very interesting that it would start like maybe within that small family environment, that those people could be the triggers, and then it worsens. And the fact that it's on a continuum really shows how this could affect a lot of people, right? Because there are probably some of us that are very sensitive to certain sounds, and we never even think about, oh, yes, that's a repetitive sound that I'm actually extremely sensitive to.
Yeah, and the sounds generally, especially now that I don't identify as I don't so the the experience of being triggered is something that we don't really talk. It's hard to describe. It's a lot of the times people will say it's uncomfortable or irritating, but a really strong trigger is actually a feeling of like a sting.
Mm,
So the listeners can't see my body, but for me, it was a physical wincing every time I heard a strong trigger sound. And it was physical pain, not just emotional discomfort or like, I wish that person wouldn't make that noise. There was a pain component to it that I think was often overlooked. And it kind of, when I realized that, helped me connect it to trauma experience. Um, and then the tension in the body that gets built up over time because the body can't relax until the sound stops or you can get away from it. And then the rage emotions that come up that we logically can tell, wow, I'm really overreacting here. This person is just eating a carrot in front of me and I want to punch them in the face or I want to yell at them. And I can't do that. I know that's inappropriate. I don't want to hurt anyone, but yet I'm filled with this overwhelming feeling of rage, anger, disgust. And then I have to try to control that. And to control it, often people take on shame. It's almost like a counterbalance to the rage. I'll take on shame so I don't act out on it. But then we're left with this, what I call trauma energy of the rage, and then shame on top of it.
and there's the link to the trauma right there.
Yes.
Mhm. Yeah. And as you described that physical experience of pain, and you showed how it would impact your body, like wincing and contorting kind of like your shoulder and your neck, and like it was something that then you just would want to make it stop. And so I could imagine a sufferer of this then has those key emotions that are different, right? From trauma per se, with like the rage, it could be, but the rage, the disgust, the aggression is primary as the reaction versus like fear and flight.
Yes. And that's how we differentiate misophonia reaction to like a trauma response. Because so sensitivity to like loud noises is very common for people who are suffering with PTSD, let's say. But it's a fear response. This is a hatred response. That's why misophonia is actually the Greek translation is hatred of sound.
Oh, beautiful. Right. So that's a great differentiation of the loud noises that are triggering the startle response in PTSD create a fear response, and in misophonia it creates a hatred, aggressive response.
Yes.
Mhm. So it's more than just being annoyed. I think that's one of the myths that our culture suggests. Oh, you're just so easily annoyed. You're so sensitive, and you're describing something so much more bodily felt and deeper, physically, emotionally, and probably neurologically as well.
Yes. And there's been a lot of efforts to treat this with cognitive modalities because I think there has been more of an emphasis on the thought or quote, sitting with the discomfort as you would with exposure therapy. But for most misophones, that's who we call people who are experiencing misophonia. For most misophones, those treatments actually make them worse. And I did talk to and learn from a therapist who specializes in OCD, and I learned a lot from her because I don't specialize in OCD, but there's also intrusive thoughts that happen in imagery that I didn't know existed with OCD experiences. And so I can see why people thought treatment for OCD could be effective for misophonia, but it's not an emotional discomfort, it's an actual physical pain. And I think that's why exposure therapy doesn't work, because we're just, it's not going to work if you keep poking the pain. It's just going to make it more sore and cause more harm,
Right.
unfortunately.
Yeah. That's so interesting. So with the treatment, maybe you could share a little bit twofold what your experience was receiving treatment. And Pete, you said, quote, "There is no definitive treatment for misophonia. We are all still experimenting. Most of us have heard, learn to live with it, and I don't accept that." Good for you, Kresta, right? And you've worked on this through your life, through really arduous work to get your own treatment and then to help others. So maybe share a little about your journey to being a therapist and being a therapist with misophonia, and then the type of help you got and where it's led.
Yes, and I will try to keep it short because that's actually a very long story, but just really briefly. Wait, say again.
We're interested.
Thank you for that. So my misophonia, I identified it seemingly overnight at about age 12, where previously I could sit down with my parents and eat dinner. I could not anymore. My parents made chewing noises that were extremely distressing to me. I didn't understand it, but I would consciously get to the table as soon as I could, scarf down my food so I could get up and leave, and not be exposed to the chewing noises or be exposed to it the various littlest amount of time. And sometimes I couldn't get through a meal. I'd actually have to pick up my plate and go to the kitchen, and I would just break down crying. I didn't understand what was happening to me. It was so uncomfortable, and it was so distressing. But it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s, later 20s, when I had heard Marsha Johnson, who's sort of given credit for identifying it and naming it. She's an audiologist, where I learned about this term misophonia. I was like, oh, that's what I have. And before that, I just thought I was crazy. Couldn't talk about it. I would try to describe it to people, and I got such mixed reactions. A lot of time it was like, what? That's not a thing. Or you must be joking. Or people would purposely make chewing noises in front of me to aggravate me on purpose. So that experience was very painful and not uncommon. I hear so many stories like that, which is largely why we don't talk about our experience with misophonia.
I have to say, right? It's not like a friend or somebody's thinking they're just aggravating or playing with you, but they're causing you physical pain, and they don't realize that because that's not so well known about misophonia. And how isolating for you to think I'm crazy, right? Starting from 12 years old on that, I don't know why this is bothering me and hurting me so much, and nobody else gets it. Like that's such a lonely experience.
Yeah, and something's wrong with me, right? Something's wrong with me. I don't know what it is, why I don't know how to fix it. Yes, very distressing. And when I finally knew about it has a name, I ended up connecting with others with similar experiences. There was actually a Yahoo group that formed at that time, and started with 3,000 people around the world. This is not just a US phenomenon, it's around the world. And that grew to about 6,000 people, and people were, chiming in on the Yahoo group, trying to figure out what the commonalities were. Was there trauma? Was there autism? Was there OCD? Was all these questions for everyone who identified with one thing. There'd be another person who's like, I don't identify with that at all. There's this big mystery as to what it was, what was going on. When I got to graduate school, so switching careers, because I worked in the film industry for 20 years, part of my journey, just again, being the heart-centered therapist, there's something in my heart saying, I want to do more to help people. And after some soul searching, decided therapy is where I wanted to go, went back to school, and I took that opportunity to research misophonia and everything that was out there. So I'd access to all the research articles and journals. There's only about 30 articles at that time. This was 2017.
Wow. Yeah.
There was an annual conference that I attended to try to learn and connect with the community. But actually that year, there was a significant study that came out with MRI scans comparing misophonia brain responses to normal brain responses with these trigger sounds. And they did find areas of the brain, it's in the anterior insular cortex, so our midbrain, responsible for emotion regulation and sort of our alert system that something's dangerous. There's more activity for a misophonia with these trigger sounds in that area of the brain. So that was a big aha moment for people as far as like, okay, this is what's going on, but it didn't solve anything.
Information, but it didn't solve anything.
Yeah. It did help normalize that this isn't a trauma thing. It isn't like a psychological thing. There is a physical reason for these responses, but yes, it didn't solve anything. So sort of fast forward through my graduate school journey, as we all do, I was required to seek therapy. So I sought therapy and found a wonderful therapist who does parts work, so IFS, which is what I was drawn to at that point in time. And so finding a therapist who also practiced that was significant for me. And also did Brainspotting, which was something I had not heard of in graduate school. And it's a brain, an eye brain body modality. And I can talk a little bit more about that and how that worked. But it was actually, I credit those two modalities for helping me find freedom from misophonia. And when I first learned about Brainspotting, I had a lot of hope because they're very, if you go to the website, there's a lot of very sort of highfalutin neurological terms and parts of the brain and everything getting thrown around, but they're basically targeting, it says Brainspotting works because we're targeting deeper parts of the brain. We're getting access to deeper parts of the brain. I'm like, well, that's where we need to go with misophonia to enact change, and also acknowledging the neuroplasticity of the brain. Learning about all of that, I was just, okay, I have hope here. Like there's hope. We're not stuck here. We don't have to be stuck here.
That's the thread that gave you hope. First, we had the information, it was in the midbrain, and then you found these two therapeutic modalities, the IFS and Brainspotting, and you had hope that maybe there was something that would help. And an amazing therapist.
Yes, yeah, I still see her. She's amazing. Such an important part of my journey.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is there a way you can share a little of like how this integration was helpful for you, like the parts work and the Brainspotting? I mean, without going into a lot of detail, but I don't think everybody knows exactly, like you said, you didn't learn about Brainspotting in grad school. I'm not sure it's even taught in grad school these days. So maybe share a little, like what is involved in a Brainspotting therapeutic technique?
So Brainspotting there is some controversy around this, but so OEI in Canada was working one eye at a time. EMDR had been developed with the bilateral eye movement to process trauma. So Brainspotting kind of along the same tradition, actually, instead of the bilateral eye movement, we use sound to create bilateral stimulation. And we instead find what we call a brain spot. So we're looking on one spot. We find one spot to process whatever is coming up. And it integrates somatic experiencing as far as when we identify an issue, we first go to the body, see where it is in the body. We ask for a SUDS 1 to 10, how strong is it? And once we're really connected to that felt sense in the body, we find a visual spot for it and process from that spot. And you can also incorporate using one eye at a time, because often one eye is a trauma eye and one is more of a coping eye. You can use multiple spots. So there's actually a setup for treatment of OCD that involves 3 spots.
Hmm.
There's also body spotting and wave spotting and resource spotting and expansion spotting. There's a lot there, and I love using it, and it complements my work so well, especially with IFS, because a lot of times we'll go to a spot and we're directly connecting with a part.
Okay, so the part kind of appears or comes out more. That spot kind of elucidates the part.
Yeah, it's almost so in IFS, generally you close your eyes, you sort of go inside and you identify the somatic feeling that's coming up for you, and you bring your attention to it and you find a part showing up in that, whatever that somatic experience is. So in a similar way, that can happen with brain spotting. But so, for example, on my misophonia journey, one of the things my therapist suggested was so there's one way to do brain spotting, which is called gaze spotting, which is the therapist doesn't necessarily help you find a spot. You can feel into whatever you're feeling in your body, and then let your eyes float open and find a spot in the room that most closely connects with that feeling. So you're basically using your own gaze to find your spot. And some people are just natural gaze spotters. I'm one of those people. So what she said was the next time you're triggered, pause for a minute, find it in your body, and then find a gaze spot for it. And I did that. I was actually listening to, if anyone's a Janina Fisher fan, Janina Fisher is one of my heroes, but she has a 46-hour training video for her complex trauma. Love the video, love the information. I still use it to this day, invaluable. But she has a mouth sound that turned into a trigger for me.
Oh no.
So I was trying to get into this video and I kept getting distracted because I kept getting triggered.
Mhm.
And one day I was listening and I can't do it anymore. So I paused the video, went in my body, found the sensation in my body, and then I found a gaze spot for what was coming up for me. And I found a part and I heard it say very distinctly, "Ow, it hurts. It hurts so much."
Hmm.
And I was able to acknowledge that part and go, I know, I'm so sorry you're in pain. And I know that if she knew she was causing pain, she would do whatever she could to try to change what she's doing so she didn't cause you pain. And I just stayed with that part. But it was interesting not only to connect with the gaze spotting to that part, but to also hear those words, "Ow, it hurts so much."
Which needed to be validated. That part needed to be seen and felt. And it's even emotional as you talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, like you get a sense of age when you go to parts, and this part felt young.
Yeah.
So, you're hearing like a young child say, "Ow, ow, it hurts so much." And like, yeah, you just can't help but feel compassion and want to help them.
Exactly. I even got that sense of young, even as you said it. I mean, sometimes it's so visceral, right? Yeah. Wow. And so that's really powerful healing. Um, because I don't know much about brain spotting. You mentioned that it's the eye spots, and then there's also sound. Where does the sound come in?
So when we start a brain spotting session, we'll use headphones and bilateral music.
Okay.
And the music doesn't need to be loud. It's the bilateral beats in the music. So you always wear headphones or earbuds. The bilateral beats provide the vibration in the eardrums, which provide the bilateral stimulation. You don't have to use music, but it's often we get more deeper, better results with the use of the music.
Okay, that makes sense. Right. Oh, that's great. So how are you incorporating this in your work as a therapist, as a trauma therapist? It sounds like you specialize in complex trauma and some pretty severe trauma. Um,
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing for me is just connecting the trauma, what I'm calling the trauma response, right, from the misophonia reaction in the body. And that's not something that is being acknowledged in traditional misophonia treatment. It's been all cognitive and
Okay.
focusing on the thoughts and the learn to live with it, but we're not paying attention to the body. But when you look at the body, there is a trauma response happening, but yet most of the people don't have like a severe trauma history. There is trauma. That's one of the things I've been trying to unpack for people. But there's usually not like severe sexual abuse or, violence or that sort of thing where it would justify that. And then especially around, if you look at the cause of the trigger response, like eating, there's usually no trauma around like some horrific, I don't know what kind of trauma you could have around food. There's no history of that. So people have dismissed it. But as a trauma therapist working with the body, and I've actually, with working with my clients, I can't help but reflect on my own experiences and my own responses. They're like, oh, that's how I responded with my misophonia. And for example, I have a sexual abuse survivors group, and we had done some work that was pretty activating. So it was towards the end of the group, and the members were a little activated. So we did some group brain spotting. We had them find a place in their body that was calm, neutral, or sorry, I'm forgetting, what is it? Calm or neutral, found it in the body, and then found a gaze spot for that, and then stay on that spot, let the body, calm down. And everyone reported feeling better, except for one who said, I did that and I thought I was connecting with calm, but I realized what I'm feeling more right now is shame. And so we processed that a little bit. And what I came to realize was that she had conflated the feeling of calm with shame. So I take on shame to feel calm. And I was driving home from that, and I was like, that's exactly what I did to control the rage of my misophonia. I took on shame to counteract my rage. So
Rage, and you could feel some calm if you were in the shame place.
yes, it would calm me down. But I've had clients conflate like numb with peaceful.
Right.
They'll go to a numb place to feel peaceful, but when we do our work together, they find numb and then they sit with it and they go like, oh, I'm actually numb here. I used to think this was peace. So I've learned so much from my clients and working with my clients, and then sort of connecting that with the misophonia experience, specifically the body work. That's really highlighted for me. If nothing else, the experience of living with misophonia is traumatic. If you're constantly
traumatic, it's the repetitive lived experience of it is traumatic. The pain that it inflicts on yourself, and the defending against it all the time. There's got to be like you said, this tension that over time becomes like cumulative trauma.
Yes, and I conceptualize trauma as collected negative energy. So whatever we experience, whether it's a physical trauma or someone yells at us or someone violates us, we absorb a certain amount of that negative energy. And if we don't have a way to express it, get rid of it, release it, it stays in our body and that accumulates, and then that becomes toxic. And so that's what I started to see with misophonia, and what I started to focus on exploring, because I think the missing piece of the trauma is that idea of collecting negative energy, because that can go back generations. And misophonia, another interesting factor of misophonia, there's a hereditary piece to misophonia. So both my sister and my niece have misophonia.
Oh my God.
There's a 23andMe category for misophonia. So
I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah. So apparently they've connected a gene to the experience of misophonia. So there is this hereditary piece. And as we know from epigenetics and all the work around that, trauma gets transferred down through our DNA, but I would also argue through our nervous system. If we've been brought up by our caretakers who experience trauma, we're going to inherit their nervous system. So again, we're absorbing this negative energy. So right now I'm conceptualizing misophonia as more of like a collection of negative energy that we accumulate over time. And one way that manifests is misophonia. And releasing negative energy became a huge part of my own healing process around it. It was integral for me finding freedom, finding ways to release that negative energy.
Yes. Wow. There's so much here, Kresta. And I wish I could like pause and go back and replay something and then jump right in, because this is just fabulous information. And especially, for our listeners who are working with trauma, and sometimes we miss things, and I love the way you've articulated this, especially things like, somebody conflating numb with peacefulness or shame with calm, right? And, for the listener out there, it's really important to remember, like, your client may not even know what peace or calm is. Instead, they know what shame or numb is, or any of the other possibilities there, right? And so, Kresta really has a wonderful expertise with trauma, and we're just learning so much. I'm so grateful to have guests like you on here, because this helps us become masters. Masters, it's always growing, but mastering the craft of doing therapy and trying to give hope and healing to our clients. So as you said, you started finding freedom by releasing the negative energy. And what were some of the ways that you could release the negative energy?
So a couple ways, and I know I could talk about this forever, so I'm going to try to keep it short. But so the first big release for me was actually when I went to train to do brain spotting. So my level 1 training, you pick an issue and it's very experiential. So you're paired with another therapist, you pick an issue, you do the brain spotting to learn the setups and experience it yourself. So I picked misophonia. And what came up for me in my processing was, first of all, it was a huge emotional release. I immediately started crying, sobbing, shaking, just all this, the sadness and the rejection that I experienced for 35 years and being misunderstood, all of that, just I felt it just come out of me in such this radical way. And when I was done, I still had misophonia, but what was significant for me was that the shame was gone. So previously, I had tried to do a lot of self-advocacy, and that included telling people roughly, I have this sound processing disorder. Please don't eat anything crunchy in front of me. And I'll get these mixed responses. But I would be very small, like, oh, can you not eat that chips in front of me? Like, really?
That's the shame part, right? When we
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. So after that brain spotting session, the shame was gone. And there was just this newfound confidence. It's like, so I have this sound processing disorder. It's called misophonia. This is what it means. And if you don't stop eating those chips in front of me, I'm going to have to leave the room.
Oh my
It
goodness.
was,
I love that. Right? Totally
yeah,
different person. That
yeah,
confidence, you just rocked it, right?
yeah.
That's
There was no, like, this is what it is. And if you can't stop doing that, I'm just going to leave. And there was no anger behind it. Like, you have to stop that or you're a horrible person. There was just so much freedom in just having that confidence and the no shame.
you
Um,
take care of yourself in a way that maybe
yeah,
you couldn't before.
yeah, yep. And just like this, I didn't care what people thought of me. I didn't care what people thought of misophonia. So that's another kind of freedom, right? And the freedom to take care of myself and not worry about what others thought of it. So that was a huge piece. Um,
Shame busting right there. I don't care what other people thought of me. It's
yeah.
great. Mhm.
And that's why I want to share this story, because even if people don't get freedom from the sting, and that's eventually where I was able to get freedom from the sting, even if people don't get that far, to find relief from the shame, to find that confidence, to find that freedom of what other people think of you, that's worth it. Like, that's worth it for anyone. That's why I share this story. Like, even if you don't get all the way there, the work on that journey is so important.
Thank you
Um,
for sharing that, Krista. Thank you so much. That's going to give listeners hope and therapists hope that, we can lift people out of the shame so they can have this sense of freedom in their life, right? Not worrying what other people think of them for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
100%. One
The
thing
next,
I want to just reiterate, because I think it's so important, and you said it before, and you said so many really important things. But again, for the therapist who has a client with misophonia, it's really important to remember the body component, the physiological somatic body component, right? That it's not just a thought-based disorder.
yes, 100%. And that's not being validated enough, especially unfortunately in the academia research world going on right now around misophonia. I'm hoping now that I'm getting my story out that that can shift. But any therapist who doesn't have misophonia and is working with someone with misophonia, validating the pain, the physical pain, not only the physical pain of the trigger, but also the invalidation, the misunderstanding, the living with misophonia, the feelings of rejection, the feelings of I'm crazy, I'm broken, and I have to keep this all to myself. Right? That's what sexual abuse survivors find so traumatic is it's not so much time and time again, I work with this clientele. It's not so much the event that happened to them. While of course that was traumatic, it's what happened inside and that they couldn't talk to anybody about it. They had to keep it from themselves. Oftentimes they were confused, not understanding, self-blaming. Again, it's that trauma piece of like living with this and isolated with this. Yeah, it's all there.
It's all there, and even that can be this intergenerational trauma. That goes back to another thing that I really wanted to underscore. You might be experiencing intergenerational trauma and not even know it, because maybe it's a parent and they're anxious, but they don't even know that they have trauma or they've had passed down trauma. I mean, I don't have to really explain this, but just what you said really brings it home.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. 100%.
You're so brave to come on this podcast and share your story, Kresta, about like the shame, the experiences you've had, in hopes of helping others, therapists and people who suffer with misophonia alike. This is at first I was thinking like, oh, this seems like a very kind of narrow discussion, but this is actually super relevant and broad, and the impact of trauma and how we treat trauma is really what we're talking about here. And that's the incredible link that you were able to make through your healing journey.
Yes. The more I dig into this and the more I've learned and the connections to trauma that I am exploring, the more I'm realizing how vast and deep this topic goes and the systemic problems we have in our society that are contributing to this, or at the very least contributing to not being able to heal around this. So yes.
So tell me a little bit more about your self-care journey around healing from misophonia, and also, two-part question, your self-care for being a therapist who works with, trauma survivors.
This is such a good segue into the next piece of the releasing the negative energy. Yes. So because I work with such heavy trauma history, I have to prioritize my self-care. When we're talking about negative energy, right? I hear stories of all these negative things that have happened to people, and it can be a lot to hold. And so I can absorb some of their negative energy that they may have, be holding or taken on. So I've really focused on addressing that for myself as a professional. And part of that actually was I every once in a while I'll go to see an energy healer. So someone who balances chakras and works, with energies. And so I did the first time I met with energy healer because I was feeling pretty foggy. I realized I had taken on a bit too much of my client's energy and needed to find out and discover different ways to deal with that and take care of myself, or else I can't be present for my clients. And so we talked a little bit about that, and I brought up misophonia just to see what she would say. And the thing that stood out to me was she's like, you need to find a way to release that rage energy.
Hmm.
And she suggested yelling and screaming, finding a way to get that rage energy out. She's like, you keep stuffing it down. It's not good for you. You need to find a safe way to let that out. And that really struck me. And I took that to heart. So what I ended up doing was, and I still do them when I need them, but I call them my rage drives. And so whenever I feel rage coming up, and it doesn't have to necessarily be connected to a misophonia trigger, anytime I'm feeling strong anger, rage that I can't express in the moment because it wouldn't be safe, or, you know, if my son is around, he's 5, I don't want to go into a rage around my son. That's transferring the rage energy, not releasing it. That's a really important component. I'll get in my car and I'll drive around my neighborhood. I don't rage drive, like drive angrily. I make sure I can do that, right? That's a whole other problem. But I get in my car and I just keep moving because the first time I did, I tried parking near a park thinking that I could yell and scream in my car and no one would hear me, but people kept walking by with their dogs. I realized it looked kind of creepy. So I just got to stay on the move. So I just drive around my neighborhood. There is a park nearby that I like to drive around specifically. And I just yell and I scream and I cuss and whatever comes to mind. It's emoting, it's cussing, it's yelling. And what's amazing about that is that after about 20 minutes, usually I get that rage energy out of me, I get this clear, just rock solid iron rod at my back of clarity about what I'm taking a stand for, what's important to me, and how to talk about it. There's just this sense of grounding and power and clarity. And so these rage drives have not only helped me release this negative energy, but it's giving me this connection with strength, like clear strength, standing up for something that's important. And I've only had to do these rage drives maybe 3 or 4 times. And I will say, usually it's my husband that triggers me. our, partners,
Sometimes.
our partners can trigger us. But I'll go on my rage drives in about 20 minutes. I get this clarity, I calm down, and I go back and I have a conversation with my husband. Honey, this is what I'm noticing, and it's really important that we address it. And because I've gotten rid of that rage energy, I am clear, I am strong, and I'm making a stand for our relationship or our son's well-being or both. He can't help but like, yeah, I agree with you. Because that's important to him too.
Exactly.
So it's
That's
been,
so beautiful. You were able to come back without being activated, but you know that metaphor of this iron rod strength that you have is so grounding, and you come back, there's the release of the rage and there's a clarity, and you bring it into the relational space instead of just that individual kind of raging place.
yes. And I think so important, I think, especially for women, because we are told and it's inferred time and time again growing up. And as women, we can't be angry. That's a forbidden emotion. And so, what do we do with that? We stuff it all down. We don't know how to express it. We're called names if we express it. And anger is so important because it's a boundary setting emotion. When we feel angry, it's identifying that something is out to lunch, something needs to be addressed. So when we're told we can't feel that, we wonder why women have such problems with setting boundaries. And so really embracing this rage and not pushing anger down, getting curious about it. It's important information. I do this with all my clients too. It helps me set healthy boundaries. And when I think about misophonia, the 2 emotions that are most common with it are anger, rage, and disgust. Those are both boundary setting emotions. And so that piece of my journey helped me look at, okay, so if family members are the original trigger people, it may not be that the eating specifically is what's triggering us, but is there some other way that our boundary has been violated and not been acknowledged? And it's just coming out as this rage towards chewing noises, almost like a projection. And I I see that time and time again, especially as adults, our partners become main trigger people. But when I've noticed that in myself, I try to look at, okay, who is my husband reminding me of? And I actually connected it with my stepdad, who was my main trigger person, and was able to process some unprocessed stuff with him. So there's, I think, this projection piece. But I think the answer is in plain sight. It's this boundary setting emotion. So where are our boundaries being violated? And it's probably not around chewing noises. It's probably somewhere else.
There's really a more holistic approach when you get down to it. But I love how you use that anger or disgust as, okay, you're ready to set a boundary. Let's figure out what boundary needs to be set, but from a like non-reactive place, And
Yeah.
I think that's such a great example, really, from couples therapist point of view too, that you can then come back and say, this actually is a boundary that would be healthy for me and probably healthy relationally, right? But you're not too much anymore. You're not big. You're in this calm place.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's the thing that sucks about misophonia, is because we are so activated, we can't set a boundary in the moment. We have to do it beforehand. So that's another piece of the sort of treatment I work with, is identifying boundaries and talking about them beforehand. Because when we're at a level 10 in activation, we can't communicate our mind. People will just get defensive or argue back, and it doesn't help anybody.
Yes. Oh, I mean, we could dive into this quite a bit. I think it's so important for my listeners, because sometimes as therapists we get overwhelmed. We get a little scared when we see anger, disgust, those big scary emotions in the room, and yet we need to lean into them. They're so informative, and we need to lean into them, and that is also validating for the client. And so I love the way you describe this as explore what boundary is being violated or what boundary needs to be set. That's a beautiful way to start leaning into the emotion.
Yes. And it's funny, I can so relate to the, having anger be scary. I'm thinking of one client in particular, a lot of complex trauma, and anger was forbidden for him. And there was one session where he was trying to express some anger he was having, and I was trying to be the calm, grounding therapist. And at one point he's like, no one's even acknowledging what I'm feeling. They're just cold and distant. And I was like, oh, he's asking me for what he needs. And so I started getting angry with him in session, and I was cussing, and he would
Beautiful.
make a comment and I would reflect, because I'd worked with him for a while. I knew his history. I was able to reflect and put into words some of the stuff that he was experiencing. And it was so immediately shifted. It was so validating for him afterwards. But it was such a shift for me as a therapist to feel like I'm joining my client here in that anger, and to see the power of that was amazing, transformative.
Exactly, Kresta. That's such a high level move. I try to help my students with this, because we need to match the energy that's in the room, within bounds. And that's just such a great description of, he didn't want to talk to somebody who was like super grounded and calm and cool, that it wasn't making the connection.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Yeah. So we've talked about self-care, a lot about therapeutic techniques for trauma and misophonia. One thing that I think is amazing that you're doing is creating community and support for therapists, and an interest list as well. Tell us about this.
So now that I've made the connection between trauma modalities and the possibility for misophonia treatment, I have started reaching out in every way possible to those communities to help educate, support the therapists trained in those modalities that may not know about misophonia, may not know how to help someone with misophonia. Um, So I've connected with several mind-body therapists. So anyone doing internal family systems, somatic experiencing, EMDR, brain spotting, and any other, TRIP, any other modalities that can be used to address mind-body trauma. And I developed a workshop that we'll see how often I do it, but the first one is going to be July 7th. And just hoping to increase awareness of misophonia and how to conceptualize it so that a mind-body therapist could use their training to help a misophone process what they're carrying. And then hopefully ongoing support for those therapists in a consult group. And also as an effort to just kind of swap stories, like the little shifts that we can make. And I just had actually a really cool shift the other day. I have a teen client who did brain spotting for the first time, and she selected a word that was a trigger for her, and especially when her mom said it. So we did a brain spot on that word. That was a trigger word. And she went from we asked that scaling question, 1 to 10, how strong is it? It was a 7-8. And by the end of the brain spotting session, she had actually identified there was energy first in her shoulders and then moved up to her throat and then went down to her hands and then out. This all took about 20 minutes. But at the end of the session, it was like a 1-0.
Amazing.
So I'll be checking in with her in a few weeks to see what the end result of that was, but to see that energy release for her just around that one word, I want to share more of those stories with my colleagues so they'll know what can we target in the session that will be helpful. What are the results from that? How can we expand on this healing? But yeah, that's what I'm trying to do now.
That's great. And is the workshop online?
So yes, it'll be via Zoom, and it's through Pasadena Trauma Therapy. My former supervisor, now boss and mentor, who's amazing, Christina, is sponsoring the CEUs. So there are CEUs available. And depending on the popularity of it, I might offer it twice a year, or I don't know, we'll have to see how it gets received.
It's going to be popular, Kresta. It's going to be popular, especially after this. We're really getting the word out and raising the awareness. There's so much more awareness we need to raise around mental health issues and trauma. And the fact that you're so energized and offering this workshop and creating consultation groups for therapists, it's exciting. It's finally, like, I would imagine, an exciting time for you to be doing this work and sharing your knowledge and expertise. And what does it feel like to have community around this? What is that feeling for you?
Oh, it's so amazing. And it's something that I really worried about when I first started going to graduate school and trying to kind of find my way and feel into what did I want to specialize in? Where did I want to go? Would I work with, a government facility? Would I do private? I actually didn't want to do private practice. But yeah, but one of the things that kept coming up was this connection to community, because I know it's so important. And as therapists, we work individually most of the time. And that can feel really lonely. And I really appreciate my boss at Pasadena Trauma Therapy, Christina, because she is so connected with community, not only the trauma community, but also just in Pasadena. She hosts networking events, and she's so great at connecting therapists with, common interests. So I really learned a lot from her. And so what I'm finding is I'm blooming into this creating community around misophonia. And I was like, that was one of the aha moments when I was connecting trauma to misophonia. I'm like, oh, I have a community around this already. I can connect my misophonia community, which was so important to me, and my trauma therapist community. This could work. And so I'm like, I did there is a misophonia podcast, and I did an episode for it. And I let them know, like, I'm calling in the troops. I'm reaching out to my IFS community. I'm reaching out to my Brainspotting community. I'm letting them know, like, they can help with this. And I have found connections with therapists who are also sufferers of misophonia. We have obviously very common interests. And it's just building, the momentum is building. That's just over the last few months, actually. So I'm really excited to see where it goes from here.
Oh, that's astounding. It's so exciting for you, and that freedom and the confidence, and then to see this start to come together and work with, other individuals and other therapists. Love how you say like other therapists who suffer with misophonia, only because like we therapists are human and we suffer and struggle with a lot of things that the shame prevents us from talking about, and so really I'm just want to acknowledge you and thank you so much, Kresta, for sharing with us so deeply your personal journey and your professional journey, as somebody who struggled with misophonia, and then now working with so many clients that have severe trauma and giving them hope, that beautiful hope that you give to your clients and now to the community. It's really amazing.
Thank you. Well, thank you for letting me share my story and helping me get the word out. This has been amazing. Thank you so much.
Yes, and before we end, Kresta, tell everybody your website where they can find you, because also any therapist that's interested in doing consult with you, finding out any more information, can go to your website.
Yes, so I do have a website set up specifically for misophonia. It's called Misophonia Freedom Lab. And I named it that because it is still an experiment. And I liked the sort of collective effort that lab sort of suggests, right? So looking for people to contribute to this work so we can find a solution together. So that's my website. I have more of my personal story with this on the website. I have some articles that I've written, talk about the modalities I use, such as IFS, Brainspotting. I even have a little article on rage and disgust, and throw those emotions some love. Oh gosh, there's so much. So yes, there's interest lists for consult groups, for any future trainings if you're interested, or workshops. Also, I'm trying to figure out a way to work with people outside of California, whether that's in consort with a therapist as a consultation set up. So currently trying to figure all that out. And eventually I'd like to expand this into parenting workshops, because as more people gain interest in misophonia, parents and even teenagers are, finding on TikTok, finding on social media, this misophonia phenomenon. And so more families are in need of support. And while I don't usually work with people under the age of 18 and families, there's a huge need for it. So I'm hoping to work in consort with therapists with that expertise, so that we can help everyone, because this really does affect whole family systems. And so that's kind of the next piece I'm going to be looking at.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, and you've put it out there, so I hope some people will contact you. It's misophoniafreedomlab.com. She has a beautiful website. Her blogs and articles are amazing. I encourage you to read them and pass them on. And this is just the best. Thank you so much, Kresta, for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I so appreciate it.
Pleasure.